Let's start with Apple. Anything from what Tim Cook said and from the numbers, anything new to you?
Yeah, I thought certainly the iPhone number was very strong at up 17%. The number in China was very, very strong. I think the highlight of the quarter, though, really was that 24% growth in services. I think Apple is still massively under-monetizing its large base of iPhone users and has a very long runway for growth in services. And this growth that we saw this past quarter, I think, is evidence that they're getting their own first-party services right, that the App Store is certainly relevant to digital consumers' lives. But more importantly, they're getting that bundling motion right. They're getting users to take Fitness Plus, music, Apple TV, all of these services together, and that's really helping to ramp up that services number. So we're very optimistic on their long-term potential in services.
Valuations still make sense to you?
Sure. So certainly broadly in the markets, valuations are elevated everywhere. When we look at valuations in the tech sector relative to the broader market, the sector's trading at about a 20% premium to the overall S&P 500. Over the past 30 years, it's typically been about a 13% premium. So there's certainly some elevations even within tech. But against that, we've seen the growth prospects for tech actually increase as a result of this theme that we've been talking about around digital transformation. We've seen the quality of the sector improve over the past many years as it's become much more dominated by software and services. And then certainly many of these big tech companies have become very strong platforms on their own, real data platforms that are very hard to disrupt. And then, of course, there's very strong balance sheets for a lot of these tech companies. So we're comfortable with where valuations are, at least on a relative basis, broadly in tech.
Jonathan, when you take a look at the outlook for Apple, you have to consider penetration in markets like India. Is Apple doing enough to secure enough market share in such markets?
No, absolutely. So they have begun opening up their own retail stores in the region, but they're also starting to experiment with manufacturing in places outside of China and India in particular. And I think that's going to help drive demand in those markets. And of course, they're also figuring out how to segment their iPhone lineup so they can hit price points that are relevant in those markets. So I think they've got a very big runway for growth in one of the world's largest markets that's largely untapped for Apple still.
So having said that, what kind of growth can be anticipated from Asia, for instance?
Sure. So certainly Apple's still growing very well in the US and in Europe. But if they can really start to get the needle moving in India, we're going to see very strong growth faster than the US and certainly faster than Europe in the years ahead. So India is obviously something that we're paying very close attention to.
Jonathan, just to circle back to one of your earlier points, and obviously, clearly Apple, despite it being already very big, there's a lot of growth still. How does the monetary policy framework that we're operating in go into how prepared and tolerant you are for higher multiples, circling back to that earlier point, because we had Jay Powell commenting overnight that monetary policy may be it's perhaps not as big as a factor to what you're seeing in asset prices. To what extent does that help you be more patient, if you will, on these valuations?
Well, certainly that's encouraging to hear him say that. It's hard to believe that there's no impact. But I think that the more important dynamic is really what we've seen through COVID. We've seen consumers really change their expectations around digital in their lives. We have seen businesses learn that they can be dramatically more productive as they bring these digital technologies in. And I think investors are starting to figure this out and willing to pay higher multiples because, of course, they see this longer term growth that we've been talking about coming. So I think that also supports the multiples. But it would be hard to believe that some of the very loose monetary policy is not helping these growth assets to a certain extent as well.
And Jonathan, Tesla's numbers full of surprises and investors pretty much caught off guard.
No, I thought the results were very good. Certainly better than expected revenue, a little bit lower than expected earnings, but the street didn't anticipate, we believe, some of the line changeovers they're doing to support the refreshes of the Model S and the Model X. But I mean, when you look out longer term, you've really got, an auto business that doesn't really have much competition right now on the secular transition to EVs. You've got a super interesting new business model emerging with regards to software and the subscriptions they can layer into that base around autonomous driving, for instance. And then you've got an energy business that really isn't in anybody's numbers right now. And you've got a regulatory environment, both in the US and in China, and also in Europe, that are increasingly friendly to these businesses that help address the climate crisis. So we think Tesla has a very long runway for growth ahead of it, a super unique business model, and most importantly, a really misunderstood profitability story.
Yes, we could spend eons talking about that debate. I wanted to ask you about Tencent and Alibaba, both, of course, within your portfolio as well. Broadly speaking, how have you adjusted? We've seen the price appreciation in Tencent, and are you thinking about Alibaba differently because we're now thinking about Ant differently?
Yeah, so certainly things have changed for Ant, and we did not anticipate that. Certainly, though, Tencent has been the relative beneficiary of that. If Alibaba and Ant are getting their wings clipped a little bit, then that's probably positive for Pinduoduo and JD, and of course Tencent partners very closely with those firms. Tencent already has a financial structure that is more in line with what the Chinese government may be trying to achieve with Ant. And so if the playing field gets leveled there a bit for Tencent, then in relative terms, they could actually do a little bit better from a share perspective. So I think that explains some of the good performance we've seen out of Tencent. And conversely, I think certainly Ant is making adjustments to their business model to deal with what the regulators are likely going to ask them to do. And that has negatively impacted Alibaba to a certain extent. And so we've made slight adjustments, but we feel very, very comfortable about the long-term opportunity for both these businesses in China. China is an enormous market. The Chinese government is eager to get more people into the middle class, and both Alibaba and Tencent are super well positioned to help China become a digital-first economy with their big cloud platforms.
Jonathan, I can't let you go without asking you this. I know it's not directly under your purview, but the talk of the market, are these message board skyrocketing names like here's one of them, of course, GameStop. We see it on our screens. What goes through your mind when you see something like this?
Yeah, so listen, we tend to be very long-term oriented investors, so we don't get into the day-to-day machinations. Certainly, we're watching this. I think from a regulatory perspective, though. And one question you didn't ask me about was, what will the incoming Biden administration have to say about big tech and some of these social media platforms? And we do believe that Section 230 of the U.S.'s Communications Decency Act that creates a safe harbor for platforms like Facebook, like a Reddit, like Discord. We think that regulators are looking very closely at putting more guardrails up around these platforms. We think ultimately that's going to benefit, though, the biggest firms that can afford to invest in ensuring that their platforms are safe and that there isn't illegal behavior going on them.